Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Janbek with the College of Communication. Thank you for the organizers for putting this together. First, I want to acknowledge my two colleagues, Professor Madeline Otis Campbell at Worcester State University and Melissa Wall at California State University, Northridge. The research I am presenting looked at the central role played by information and communication technologies in the migration journey and displacement of experiences of Syrian refugees in Jordan, where I'm originally from, and in Germany. The research documents how ICTs serve as lifelines for refugees. And I will start with one of the most concrete examples of what I mean when I say lifeline. Next slide, please. I'll give you a minute to read this. By now, some of you may have figured out what is happening here. Every year, hundreds to thousands of migrants die on sea routes in search for safety. Every Syrian I ever met told me that the search for safety was the primary reason they fled Syria. The chat captured here is between a refugee who was on a capsized boat using WhatsApp and Google Maps to communicate with a volunteer in Germany. This volunteer is passing on information to the Coast Guard, so this group can be rescued. The volunteer is actually a refugee himself who had experienced the same event when he migrated. Before and during migration, cell phones are used to learn about the economic opportunities in the country of destination. For example, refugees sometimes compare GDPs of different European countries before choosing where to go. Cell phones are also used to identify the safest routes for the journey. But accessing information in and of itself is challenging. Next slide, please. This leads me to the concept of information precarity, which was coined in our research. Information precarity refers to the condition of instability that refugees experience in accessing news and personal information. As you can imagine, information, for example, about road and border conditions or what smuggler is most trustworthy, is not readily available. And even when one can access such information, there is no guarantee that that information is accurate. This means that information precarity potentially leaves refugees vulnerable to misinformation and possibly dangerous information that can impact their economic and social well-being. Next slide, please. Dangerous information could be about events at home. It could be about traveling conditions. So refugees must adapt. They adapt by relying on multiple sources of information to verify accounts. They basically use the process of triangulation, which we use in research. They rely on their cell phones mostly for that. Images of refugees charging their cell phones are plentiful in media circles. Every refugee family I have met over the years owned one cell phone, with some owning two. Based on this research, we know that refugees prioritize owning a phone over other essentials like food and water. Next slide, please. The Syrian ICT story I shared with you is, of course, part of a grand shift in communication patterns among the displaced. As you can see, the number of displaced people around the world has been increasing. Of the 80 million displaced people, over 10 million are Syrian refugees and internally displaced Syrians. Given the trying times we are living in, and finally, I will end by pointing out that there's plenty one can learn from the 80 million people who are displaced about what it means to be resilient and about what it means to be hopeful during difficult times. Thank you very much.